So thank you to all of you who are giving us an hour of your time to join us and talk about the wellness tourism market, and in particular, Asia versus the Middle East. The global tourism wellness market is actually expected to hit the 1.4 trillion mark in 2027. And wellness has touched virtually every aspect of our hospitality, travel, and tourism industry as it is today. From the airport experience to how hotels and destinations are being developed and promoted, wellness is increasingly playing a central role, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, first of all, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists who have got expertise in so many different areas. Kathy here, Kathy Felicio Chon, is our managing partner of Asia Pacific and is famous in the wellness tourism arena. I remember when I joined Finn 7 years ago, I was very impressed with Kathy's knowledge. She sits on the Global Wellness Institute board and has had so much experience over the years of helping hotels actually create brands and promoting so many different wellness experiences, and has become one of the real global experts. And then we have Thomas Morris, who is our senior partner based in Abu Dhabi, who brings two areas of expertise. He's also a EMEA lead for global intelligence, so he loves talking about stats. And we've got some great stats today that we're going to go through with you and talk about the relevance of them to what we're talking about in terms of the future of wellness tourism. And he's also our man on the ground based in Abu Dhabi and is able to talk firsthand at what he's seeing. He's been there nearly a year now, Thomas, isn't it? So it's going to be a real interesting debate in terms of what is it the Middle East now that's driving the future of wellness tourism, and where does Asia sit in that? So I think it's going to be fantastic to see the conflicting views. So Kathy, I'm going to kick off with you. You sit on the board of the Global Wellness Summit and have witnessed the rise of wellness in Asia in the last 3 decades. Could you talk to us a little bit about how big is wellness travel today, and where is Asia in all of it to sort of set the scene?
Well, she mentioned earlier, Debbie, you know, the global wellness tourism market is really one of the fastest growing segments right now in travel, and it's going from 720 billion in 2019 pre-pandemic and predicted to grow to 1.4 trillion by 2027. You know, that's a mere 2.5 years away. So and I would say that we're really, so wellness is on steroids today. It's probably the pandemic has completely accelerated that. And where does Asia fit in all of this? I think first and foremost, it's widely recognized as a region. Asia is the growth engine for global travel, just in terms of sheer scale, the sheer size of the outbound travel segments from, you know, to the most populated countries in the world, China and India. But also the dynamic of Asia's fast-growing middle class. You know, so much about wellness is tied to the growth of the middle class, right? We've got when you reach that certain point, you're certainly seeing an impact on more travel, more leisure experience, more wellness pursuits, and so on and so forth. And the other thing, another driver, is changing consumer behaviors. I mean, we've got consumers today across the spectrum from Gen Z all the way up to boomers who are so engaged in wellness in different forms of it. I mean, largely driven by social media and having access to so much information. So, you know, Asia, I would say that the modern day wellness movement, as well as the ancient wellness movement, belongs to Asia. I mean, virtually every wellness therapy or module finds its roots back to some of the most ancient philosophies in Asia, being whether it's traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda or the way we view energy work, yoga, you name it. So much of that, these ancient philosophies, ancient philosophies, have such an outsized influence on other modalities all over the world. So Asia is still at the center of all of this, I feel. And mind you, Thomas, the last time I checked my geography, I think the Middle East is part of Asia. So I'm not ready to concede.
We don't have time for that debate, unfortunately, Kerry. Yeah,
That's another history piece. Okay.
exactly. Yes.
But Thomas, you recently wrote the Middle East chapter for the future of wellness tourism in terms of where it's going for the Global Wellness Institute annual trends report, which was launched in New York a couple of weeks ago. For many in our audience who may not be up to speed on the latest developments in the Middle East, could you sort of give us an overview of the developments and trend and what you see as really driving the expansion and trend in the Middle East?
Yeah, absolutely, Debbie. I think what's interesting is Kathy talking about kind of the roots of wellness being founded in Asia when you think about Ayurvedic treatment or yoga, and that's absolutely true. And I'm not going to debate that. But what I would debate is the future of wellness. I think what we're seeing in the Middle East is blending some of that kind of traditional methods and a lot of those which originated in Asia, but building on that with kind of cutting edge technology. So fusing kind of age old traditions with modern luxury. I think kind of the UAE and Saudi are probably the two key markets driving the wellness economy in this sense. So I think Saudi Arabia's wellness economy, it's now worth around 98.8 billion, and it's growing at a rapid rate, so around 66% annual growth each year, which is incredible, really. And what we're seeing with these kind of new generation resorts in the Middle East is that they're not only fully immersive and holistic, so they blend wellness, culture, history, luxury, sustainability, but they're also uniquely Arabic. So they lean on the unique characteristics of therapies, rituals, ingredients, which are kind of deeply rooted in Arabic culture. In terms of what's driving some of these trends that we're seeing in terms of the focus on wellness in the Middle East really being a global wellness hub, I think there's a few that I'll point out. Obviously, wellness is at the heart of national visions. So if you look at the UAE's Vision 2031, that emphasizes prevention and investment in kind of AI enhanced clinical care, but also in wellness. And you see kind of similar threads in Oman's national vision, Qatar, and also Saudi Arabia, of course, it's Vision 2030, which is, they're investing lots of money in public health campaigns targeting chronic illness, but they're also really focusing on wellness tourism. And we're seeing kind of off the back of that, developments like NEOM and the developments on the Red Sea, which have wellness and sustainability at their core. But I would also add that, let's not forget that the Middle East is also steeped in centuries-old wellness practices, and these are really being kind of integrated into modern wellness offerings. There are numerous examples across the region. There's just to pick out a couple. We have Qatar's really fabulous Zilal Wellness Resort, which is kind of a really good illustration of that kind of traditional Arabic and Islamic medicine at the forefront, but it's kind of with new age based wellness rituals. And the Six Senses Ziggy Bay and Amman, similarly, you have kind of indigenous wellness practices set amongst breathtaking landscapes with really cutting edge technology. So I think it's that mix of the traditional and the new age, which is really unique to the Middle East. And I think that's why, in my mind, the Middle East is really the driver of global wellness.
And I think, Thomas, as well, the scale and the scale of the projects opening up there, there's really no region that can compare today, correct?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it, because countries with significant resources like the UAE and Saudi are placing wellness like really at the core of their kind of 10-year, 5-year visions, and they're investing massively in this. So when you look at the development on the Red Sea, we're talking about 29 different resorts cropping up over the coming years. It's going to be huge. And if you look at those lists of resorts and what they're offering, wellness is really at the core of every single one, and they have some amazing things that are set to come there. And we're, that's certainly a development that everyone is excited about when it comes to wellness.
You would say, Thomas, that we all see in the news about the scale of the developments in the Middle East. So would you say that actually wellness is being incorporated into every single one of them? And are there any particular examples that you'd want to shout out about?
Yeah, there are a few. So when you look at the pipeline, I think the last time I checked the figures, we're looking at around 600 projects in the work, and that's going to deliver about 150,000 rooms, and these are specifically focused on wellness. So Amala, which is part of that kind of Red Sea development, is the one that is generating lots of the headlines. So 8 of the resorts of those 29 resorts are going to come to market to launch this year. And there are a couple of really kind of exciting things from a wellness point of view. So we have the groundbreaking longevity resort, Clinique La Prairie, which is designed around these kind of core pillars of medical care, movement, well-being, and they're going to have some like really cutting edge technology. So we're talking about medical diagnostics, skin rejuvenation programs, cryo chambers, hyperbaric suites, radiology services. So this is kind of clinical grade wellness being integrated into resorts that are catering both to kind of local populations and international tourists. There are a number in Amala which are coming to fruition this year, and then also other areas. So quite recently we saw that Sri Lankan brand Sentani Wellness announced that, along with the kind of Amani tourism development company, they would launch a resort in Oman in the coming years, again focused on integrating traditional methods with cutting edge technology. And we've seen over the past year there are a number of different resorts cropping up in the UAE. So Zero Wanzabil in Dubai was the one that kind of generated most of the headlines that came to market last year, and is seemingly doing very well. So there's lots of exciting developments. I couldn't cover them all in this webinar, but
No, of course not.
yeah,
And I think
lots to look forward to.
yes, from a global perspective, two of the biggest source markets for any destination are China and India. And Kathy, we brought out a report last year, didn't we, about how Chinese women in particular are changing their travel habits. How do you think that the Chinese market and their desire for wellness tourism affects some of these projects that we're talking about?
So we actually did 2 reports in the last 2 years because we know that the Chinese outbound travel segment is so complex and also changing very quickly. And we wanted to challenge the prevailing notion of, Chinese travelers as just being one-dimensional, whether they're shoppers or groups or, people who are to be blamed for over tourism, or it's certainly out there in terms of in just one dimension or another. And so we've always been fascinated about tracking how this particular segment is evolving through the year. And so our first study was immediately on the first year that travel restrictions were finally lifted. As many of you know, China was the last one to actually lift travel restrictions, and our study then happened the same week that those announcements were made. And then subsequent to that, we did another study the year after, which really focused entirely on women, female luxury travelers. And because we were going into this already with the knowledge that it was women driving the entire travel recovery, they were the ones making decisions. They were certainly a majority of who was traveling at that time. And out of that exercise, we were able to come up with a number of archetypes to really fully describe their behavior, their patterns, how they were. What was interesting in both those studies was how much wellness influenced their decision-making process in terms of where they chose to go, the types of activities that they were open to, the hotels and the amenities that they were open to, and how much that weighed in terms of the decision making. And so that to us was quite remarkable because, for example, we tend to think that shopping is the ultimate experience that the Chinese travelers engage in, but we were seeing more and more that they were open to slow travel, car travel, because for many years during the pandemic, largely domestic travel was what was happening. So suddenly they discovered the joys of driving and being on the road, and that's never happened before. Being on trains and traveling, to closer destinations, going to visit temples, meditation, revisiting traditional Chinese medicine and its many different facets. So there was this huge revival to go back to their roots, but at the same time to take things a lot slower. There was a renewed appreciation for nature. I mean, again, we saw this globally, but for the Chinese who tend to decide, okay, we will go to the cultural cities, whether it's London, New York, in Paris, largely driven by where you'll find the best shopping destinations, museums, and so on and so forth. Today, it's more, okay, where can we go for the greatest hikes? Can we watch the Aurora Borealis? Africa, travel to Africa and safaris are also very much popular with this segment today. So it's just changed their view of what was out there. And I would imagine that that's the case as well for India. And I know India, with Thomas, you were involved in the study on the India travel market last year, correct? Can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are some similarities that we saw with the Indian population and some differences there. So we conducted a proprietary study, a primary survey with Indian travelers under 35, because what we'd seen in the market was there was lots of kind of research on older demographics of Indian travelers, but we wanted to know, what's coming next? What are the next generation of Indian travelers interested in, and where are they willing to spend their money also? One of the things we found is that, and this isn't surprising, but they were really focused on kind of once in a lifetime travel opportunities, and they were willing to spend significantly more if they could do that today rather than someday. So we saw this kind of this trend of people spending increasing kind of amount of their daily budget or their budget for a month on travel, and they were willing to do that rather than save, which is, when you look at Indian travelers historically, especially kind of slightly older demographics, there's a lot of saving culture there. But with the younger demographics, we didn't see that quite so much. They were willing to spend now, and they were willing to spend significant amounts of their income on travel. Certainly, kind of slow travel was a trend that we saw. It's quite interesting that these travelers are young, they're tech savvy, they're impulsive, but they were also really kind of willing to spend on things that would make their travel comfortable, and they were willing to spend a bit more on air travel, for instance, and because all of this was part of the holiday itself. So it wasn't just a case of getting to a destination, but the holiday really started as soon as they got to the airport. In terms of markets they were looking at, obviously the UAE was a big one, and what we saw from wellness is that 86% of those kind of young Indian travelers would be willing to spend more on wellness and kind of health retreats if they were available. And I think this is a key point for the Middle East in general, is that while there's this kind of massive investment in really kind of new age resorts, I still think there needs to be a bit of a focus on perception in foreign markets. So for the Indian traveler, they would come to the UAE, often to Dubai, and they would spend their money on accommodation, shopping, and potentially a few kind of big once in a lifetime things, whether that be kind of getting out to the desert, doing dune bashing. But when it came to kind of wellness and culture, they didn't really see the Middle East as a destination in that respect, partly because India has, it all on its doorstep, and it has fantastic offering there. But I think that is a real area of focus for the Middle East in general, is to make sure that in the minds of some of these travelers, it really is positioned as a leader in wellness.
And I think if I remember from that report, Thomas, Oman and Jordan were the destinations also to watch in terms of that combination of the natural outdoors that both those countries offer versus the sort of huge hotels and high-tech resorts.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting trends there, when we're thinking about the types of traveler in the Middle East specifically, we're seeing a lot more of the local population engaging in wellness activities. And really that's a chance for them to reconnect with their own culture and with some of the kind of traditional methods and rituals. And places like Oman and Jordan, which offer that in abundance, are really popular in that respect. Whether it be travelers from Saudi or the UAE. Previously they would have gone to places like Sri Lanka or the Maldives or maybe India, but more and more they're willing to travel regionally. So, for instance, we see a lot of Saudi nationals traveling over into Jordan, and wellness would be kind of really at the heart of the offering there. So, I think that's a key trend which is shaping the direction of wellness here.
And in a way, I think that India report that we did was very much focused on the younger generation. And if we look at some of the things that came out in our own Fin Partners report, we saw that the younger generation are really thinking about their health early, much earlier than we did, however many years ago, and they care about it. And there's a whole trend for sober curious amongst the younger generation. And so I think that so much of what actually Asia and the Middle East offer is just as important for this generation and their mindset as the older generation with more time and money, isn't it?
And we talked about that actually in our recent Future of Wellness Tourism report. I think the first topic that we talked about there is what we call age bending or age benders, where basically people are now considering not their chronological age, but their biological age, right? So you could be a 60-year-old person, but because you're in such amazing health, you have a biological age of a 38-year-old, right? And whatever the product of biohacking is today. But what that means is that you've got people in their 60s who are 38, 40 years old, but you've got also people in their 20s who are adapting behaviors of people much older, because the whole concern about longevity happens a lot sooner for them than the generations ahead of them. So it's this notion that the age is now kind of more of an abstract construct, and it's something about, there's a blurring of generational lines nowadays, where, to your point, that it's the millennials are very concerned about wellness, and social media had a lot to do to drive that as well.
And I think it in a way it's about the mindset, isn't it, of the future traveler. I mean, I think one of the stats that came up in our report was that by 2033, 1 in 6 people are going to be over 60, and they're really prioritizing, longevity. And that this difference between actual age and perceived age, the average is, if you're healthy, you think of yourself as 20 years younger. And actually building into your annual holiday plans wellness experiences of all different sorts, does make people feel better about themselves. I mean, there was lots of other things that came out of our Future Wellness Tourism report, which we'll give it a link later, and it can be downloaded from the website. But Kathy, out of our report, because it was long and we could spend an hour just talking about that, what other travel trends do you think people will be most interested in that are going to define 2025 and beyond?
So we mentioned slow travel, and I think that this is here to stay. This is not going to be a 2025 trend, but perhaps a trend that's going to define the next 3 to 5 years, and how that is expressed in terms of the actual experiences and the products that are being created today. That's going to have a longer lasting kind of expression, right? And the other thing that I feel that's just booming, and then we have been talking about this now for a couple of years, but I think we're really reaching that like crescendo, is solo travel, but now I call solo social travel, because people are now are looking at solo travel as a rite of passage. So it's something that becomes part of their lifestyle. But at the same time, this is happening in the context of our need to continue to connect and form community, and make connections. And we're in the midst of an epidemic of loneliness, right? So on one hand, we need to have experiences that can provide for that solitary experience, but also infused with opportunities for people to connect with others, like-minded people, whether it's other travelers on the trip or the people who are in the places that they visit. So I think that this is a huge trend, and certainly we're seeing it. I mean, anecdotally for me, I'm seeing more and more of my friends and people I know are saying that they are feeling even more bold to embark on a solo trip than ever before. And I think, hotels, the travel companies are embracing that. They're creating more experiences that provide solo travelers with a sense of safety and social connections, right? So we're seeing that. I think we're also on the cusp of this kind of popularity of retreats. And when I say retreats, these are, intensive experiences that can last anywhere from 3 days to 7 days to 3 weeks, right? And they can be centered around a specific wellness goal, whether it's, being able to sleep better, and conquering your nighttime demons, to health concerns that often are, underserved. For example, women's health problems, whether it's menopause. Menopause is having a major moment today, right? And so retreats have become a fantastic vehicle for resort brands and wellness brands to be able to kind of put their hat in the game and say that, yes, we are addressing this in a way that's meaningful. They're bringing outside experts to help facilitate it. It's a way for them to curate a novel experience. It's a way for them to build customer loyalty going forward. So we're going to be seeing more and more retreats going forward. Then the other thing that I think, again, this is not new, but I think that it's just intensifying, is the whole access to nature. I think the net winner from the pandemic is really nature. I think we discovered, our love of nature, our need for nature. But the reality is, in the context of climate change, we know that, and the after effects on over tourism and so on and so forth, is nature at some point will come at a cost. Whether it's a tourist tax, whether it's, for you to be able to access that national park, you're going to have to pay a fee. This is going to come at a cost for us, because there has to be a mechanism that we can protect nature, right? Then the impact of climate change on seasonality, I think that is really shifting greatly. I mean, we've had, 3 to 4 years, some pretty unreal, extraordinary climate situations. And I think that's just going to get worse. And so now people are rethinking their summers. Do you go to Europe? And if you go to Europe, do you go to the usual destinations, or do you go more up north, or do we take our holidays another time? So this whole thing is taking place, and I think it's going to continue to grow.
And I think, even I personally am a great example of that. So I'm going on my first retreat this year ever. It's in Finland, so Nordic, and it's on a lake. I'm not sure I'll do the open swimming. And I'm potentially, I thought I was going on my own, and now my friends know about it. They all want to come. But again, that would be potentially my first solo trip. And solo travel, you're absolutely right. when I was at the WTTC summit in Perth, or we were both there last year at the press conference, Julia Simpson, CEO, talked about the fastest growing demographic globally is women traveling on their own over 65. Yep. Which is extraordinary. And we're seeing, and women's health, as you say, again, we've got so many examples. And these are trends that maybe started in Asia. We talk in our report about postpartum care, and I think it started in Korea, but now it's happening in America. Right?
Japan, it's everywhere. I mean, I say like it's about time, right? If you want us to have more babies, you've got to make it easier for us to do it.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and again, some of that is mindset and also people changing. So Thomas, from wellness clearly transcends, it's more than travel. What are there any other key trends that we talk about in our report, or that you really think are driving the Middle East, or you're seeing in the Middle East that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, if I can just go back briefly to Kathy's points. She made some fantastic points there, and I think it's really interesting to see those trends, which almost seem conflicting in that people want to be able to switch off. They want peace. They want tranquility. It's like silent travel is a big thing, and a lot of people are doing this alone. Yet at the same time, they do want connection. They don't want to be fully alone, and it's kind of, those feel like two separate things. But we see a lot of resorts, especially in the Middle East, that are really kind of catering to that market where you can go. There's a place in Fujairah in the UAE, which is an island, and you can go on this island, and they have wellness in terms of hikes and group meditation, and it's a chance for people to get together and meet like-minded individuals, and it really kind of plays to that. The other thing that we're certainly seeing here is sports being integrated into that wellness offering. So I saw a fantastic phrase the other day, which was racketeering, which is the focus on kind of racket sports in as part of like a wellness offering. And that is huge. And I mean, for me, I like to play paddle, and in the UAE and Abu Dhabi and Dubai, you can't go a kilometer without seeing a paddle court or two. And now we're seeing kind of pickleball increasingly being included here, and a lot of people are taking kind of workout holidays. I read somewhere that the search term workout holidays had increased by 50% in terms of the people that were searching that globally. So I think that's just another element of that wellness experience that we're seeing here. And then, sorry, Dave, do you want to?
No, I was just wondering, when you're saying that, how much of that is also driven by, sports tourism? Because, I mean, obviously, from a destination perspective, a lot of governments have put so much budget in terms of, using sports to build a whole kind of initiative, whether it's the World Cup. And I often see the lingering after effects of that, which is fantastic at a marketplace level.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at Qatar, and obviously the World Cup was there, the legacy is world-class sporting infrastructure. So obviously they had a lot of tourists, and it did, it had an impact on national image and perception, but it's also increased wellness tourism because they're able now to market different kind of sports holidays and retreats. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
So we did a LinkedIn poll in advance of us doing this webinar, and what the audience were most interested in is who are the wellness tourists of the future. So if we can just touch on that from maybe a little bit more of a global perspective. What views do you have in terms of the future wellness tourists? And maybe we talk about them as wellness tourists, don't we? Because we're in the industry, but they don't see themselves as that. They see themselves as wanting different things out of their holiday experiences that gives them a more healthy opportunity in terms of what they're doing to their body and mind. Because I think we haven't touched on mind as well, I think, that came up in our report in terms of, the growth again globally of horrendous diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, and how important it is to be active from a mind perspective. And I think there's lots of these products being offered out there as well, aren't there?
Yeah, I don't think we can look at who the future wellness consumer is along traditional demographic and lines. I think wellness now transcends. We're talking about people in their early 20s all the way up to those who are living into their 80s. I think it's not necessarily a behavior or a driver that only is relevant to, let's say, to one generation per se, right? And I think really we are in the midst of a wellness boom. I think we all recognize that. I think what we're having to now adapt to is how do we rethink the way we try and capture these markets, because we can argue that the modern day wellness movement owes its success to today's aging baby boomers, right, who are now 60 and above. But and yes, and they are still the ones spending, and they still have the ones with the budgets to spend. But we're seeing the younger generation who are allocating much more of their share of purse towards wellness pursuits. And mind you, I just wanted to again reframe something that the Global Wellness Institute released many years ago, a description of what the wellness tourist. They came up with two categories: the primary wellness tourism traveler, say wellness tourist, who traveled primarily for wellness. So for example, I am going to go to a yoga retreat. That was a primary wellness traveler. And the second, what they call a secondary wellness traveler, was the ones who engaged in wellness activities while traveling. They could be traveling for leisure. It could have been a girlfriend getaway. It could have been a business trip, and they're spending on getting a massage or trying to eat healthier. So that obviously composes a big chunk of the market. So we're seeing both of these segments growing significantly, and you can have one person being both. Perhaps on this travel right now that I'm taking to Tokyo may be a business travel, but I will engage in some kind of wellness activity. Then I could have another trip planned, say to Bali, whereby I'm going to do some kind of a yoga retreat, and that's purely and intentionally for wellness. So I think the future of wellness really belongs to anybody who can afford it and afford to travel.
Yes, our report also talks about wellness sabbaticals, which I thought was quite interesting,
Yeah.
and in terms of people going away for 3 weeks plus, and also investment in real estate that is developing wellness product, in terms of where people might choose to buy to spend more of their time. I think the global wellness real estate market is going to grow from 438 billion in 2023, which is what it was then, to 912 billion by 2028, which is extraordinary. And these are going to be people choosing to spend more of their time abroad and investing their hard-earned money into real estate around this, rather than just thinking, am I going to go and buy a house in Spain?
Right.
You've seen the real estate develop quite dramatically in both Asia and Middle East, correct?
And I think what's driving that as well, and again, this is a byproduct of the pandemic, is this whole global nomadism. We're nomads now. I think it's proven to us that we can be posted in Mexico in a resort and still continue to work, or we can choose to park ourselves in a place for 2 months somewhere else and still be engaged and productive. And I think for people who are looking at the prospect of, I don't want to say retirement because I feel that that's so dated already, right? Is the fact that you can actually rethink the way you're going to age, that you no longer have to be in one place. Like you can stay in a place, in an amazing resort that can actually provide really good deals for anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, and post yourself there. And so the question then for developers and those in the real estate market is then, are we creating the products to be able to engage and embrace this particular segment?
A few good
The other
examples,
thing
aren't there?
Yeah, just on that, I think the other key driver of wellness being integrated into real estate is just the availability of wellness now to your average person in some of these markets. So certainly in the Middle East, for instance, I live in Abu Dhabi and I can walk down the street. Not many people walk in the UAE, they'll probably drive, but I could drive down the street and I can visit a kind of longevity wellness hub, sit in kind of an oxygen chamber or do
Yeah,
cryotherapy, and it's not ridiculously expensive. You can treat yourself like a top athlete. This only, 5 years ago, only top athletes would be doing this kind of thing. And now
yeah.
it's your everyday person that's engaging with those kind of activities. And I think once you do that, there is then that expectation of, well, why can't that be like really part of my life, as in really kind of woven into where I live and the community that sits around me. Um, Shah Emirates, which is a big development happening here. It's about 40 minutes outside of Abu Dhabi. It's in between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Is a great example in that sense, in that it will be a wellness community where wellness is integrated into everything from the kind of fitness and recreation facilities, even to the design of the buildings and how they're set out.
And they've got
So
that
that's
model,
that's
haven't they, of being able to then you invest, but you can rent it out too. So the fact that the market is booming is good from an investment developer
yeah.
perspective as well, isn't it?
And I think a lot of the investors will be either Europeans or, potentially Americans. I would think more Europeans, as well as obviously local buyers. But yeah, we're certainly seeing a kind of marketing focus from them on people, perhaps from the UK that know the region, that visit Dubai or Abu Dhabi quite frequently, and want somewhere where they can exist, but also have the kind of that wellness offering sitting
Mm.
around them.
Now I just realised we've got 15 minutes to go. I've got a few more questions, but I would encourage anybody joining us today to put your questions, if you've got any, in the chat. So please let me have a look if we've got any yet. Okay, yeah. So from Susan Black, she asked, with North America's wellness market projected to reach 919 billion by 2025 and 56% of US wellness travelers over 50, longevity focused travel is on the rise. Absolutely, as we mentioned here. How is the Middle East positioning itself to attract North American travelers who are sort of 55 plus, seeking these immersive health focused experiences? Thomas,
So I
you want to
think
kick off with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I think, one of the interesting things, my perception, and I don't know the wellness market in the US inside out, but one of my perception is that the availability of wellness offerings in the Middle East, it's more accessible here than it may be in the US in terms of availability and pricing. Um, so I think there is an element there where accessibility is a key thing. And then we're also seeing, a lot of the resorts focus on longevity offerings, specifically focused on the international tourists. So we have the Rosewood in Abu Dhabi, and they have a kind of longevity package where you go in and you kind of meet a medical professional who, examines you, and then you have a program for your stay there, and it's really kind of ingrained in the whole experience. I think longevity is certainly the hot topic in wellness in its entirety, and I think it's a cure for lots of things going on vacation. I could almost see in future kind of going to the doctor and them telling you to go on holiday to cure certain things.
Well, funnily enough, I
Yeah.
was on a panel last year that was run by the Global Coalition of Aging, and I was one of only two tourism people on it. And they had some incredible stats about how, and it was particularly this is a US organization. The governments are encouraging people to invest in their health, because the more people that either go on holiday, this is when they're older, and it tackles the loneliness issue that we talked about earlier, or incorporate wellness into their holiday experiences, it's actually saving huge amounts to the health system, because people are potentially living longer by building these experiences into all of their overseas leisure. So it's massive, and I guess that's America, but it's the same for any government. And I know that some of the long-term ambitions from the various countries in the Middle East are also about tackling issues like obesity, aren't they, Thomas, in terms of them encouraging people to invest more in their health every day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of those chronic illnesses are a significant problem here. And that's why the kind of the different governments are investing so much in terms of kind of preventative health, rather than healthcare itself, and wellness is a key part of that. I think the other interesting thing in the Middle East is, you mentioned kind of mental health, Debbie, and I think for international tourists, obviously this is critical. And perhaps the Middle East hasn't always had the best reputation in that sense, but I think we're seeing kind of noteworthy cultural shifts in that respect, in the perception of kind of psychological well-being and the offering there. And I think there's still some way to go to catch up with other regions in that respect, but it's really promising that is taking place, and you know, some of the stigma that may have been about previously, those walls are getting broken down, and we're seeing kind of governments in these countries come out and, you know, release statements and put investment into mental health clinics and things like this. And I think that's really promising, and is only going to help when we think about international tourists coming into the Middle East.
And how about tech? We haven't talked too much about that. And maybe this can be the first webinar of 2025 where we don't mention AI. But if you are a US traveler and you're coming into the Middle East, as an example, are there any differences in the kind of tech that's being used in some of these wellness experiences that maybe they wouldn't see in the US?
I think in terms of tech, the US is pretty advanced in terms of its its tech offerings. But there are certainly some things within different resorts cropping up. So there are kind of specific longevity wellness hubs, for instance. And over the past year, they've expanded across Dubai, into Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and they really kind of fuse. I think what's interesting about the Middle East is that fusion of the traditional, which we discussed at the start, with really cutting edge innovation and technology. So you get kind of quantum body scanning, red light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen chambers. And these are within, you know, luxurious clinics that you would, you know, be happy to spend part of your vacation in. So I think certainly the Middle East is up there in terms of its kind of technological adaptation, and mixing that with kind of the traditional Arabic and Islamic approach. But also, you know, I know that the US is also making huge advancements in that sense also.
What about Asia, Cassie, in terms of from the tech perspective? Do you have a view?
Um, you know, I don't necessarily think that we're ahead when it comes to tech as it relates to wellness. I think we're ahead of tech when it comes to everything else, depending on which part of Asia we're talking about. But I do feel that Asia is very quick to adapt whatever is cutting edge elsewhere. I mean, they are very quick to take that on. So if it's trending in the US, you can bet that you know, you've got investors here already thinking about bringing it out to their markets. I wanted to circle back to the earlier question about how do we make the Middle East palatable to North American travelers. And I think, you know, like any emerging destination, there's a whole lot of education that needs to happen, an investment in education, right? And really understanding the region. I mean, I say this because Asia also went through the same thing. I mean, I will tell you, 50 years ago, I don't think many people could tell the difference between Taiwan and, let's say another island off Japan for that matter, or, being able to tell the nuanced difference between North Asia and Southeast Asia. And I think as a region, they've made great strides, and largely because of so many movements happening in these different markets that have been exported elsewhere, that we've gained a greater understanding for the different cultures in Asia. And I would expect that the Middle East will go through the same thing. I mean, to lump it together as one is an easy way to kind of refer to it. But to be able to speak to what makes them different, and even within the UAE, what makes each of these, the Emiratis different, Oman versus Jordan for that matter. Even if you look at North Africa, technically you can say that Egypt is also part of the Middle East, and Egypt has certainly been making a huge play recently in terms of tourism, because so many of the things the landmarks that have been under renovation are finally opening up. So I think there's a lot of that education piece that needs to happen, especially targeted the North American audience, right, who don't necessarily have the same proximity to that region that Europeans have. So I hope that answers the question that came up.
And certainly the air access for sure now from the US into the Middle East in particular, in terms of how it's grown. And our report predicts the destinations of the future, and politically very correct. We have one in Asia and one in the Middle East. So we had Japan for Asia and Saudi in the Middle East. In terms of both the regions that you live in, are there any others that you think are worth a mention today before we finish?
So in our report, which again anybody can download for free, when we will flash that at the end, so you see the link, we identified 5 countries which we believe are leading the way to what wellness tourism could look like in the future. And naturally, we talked about Saudi Arabia and the rationale behind that, which Thomas so compellingly talked about earlier. But we also mentioned countries like Korea. I mean, Korea, just as they have been exporting K-pop and K-cuisine, K-beauty has such a huge influence, right, in the way we, skincare today in general, right? But also there's so many things happening within the country, from medical tourism, the rise of, aesthetic centers, new luxury brands, hotel brands coming in with really compelling wellness offerings. There's going to be an amazing water park that's being built very close to the airport, the revival of temple stays. So we're seeing Korea just, going through this whole kind of push. But Japan has been just off the rails in terms of just being arguably probably the most popular destination in Asia today. And they just tick all the boxes. They have amazing nature offerings, amazing, right? But also a culture of bathing and a type of hospitality that, which they call motanashi, that can only be described, within the context of the Japanese culture and the way they give service. Their tradition for kaiseki, which is honoring the seasons and the bounty of the seasons. So there's so much about Japan, from a natural thermal springs offerings to vibrant cities and to fantastic culture and traditional wellness, cultural wellness traditions that just give it such a big space. But also in Europe, we've got Iceland and Italy. And I mean, Italy you'd never think of Italy as a wellness destination, because when you think about Italy, I think of quite the opposite of wellness. I think of overindulgence, eating and drinking, right? But you would be amazed at the amount of thermal springs that are being developed, resorts around thermal springs, the whole, the Dolomites, the combination of nature and wellness happening in the Dolomites. So there's a lot happening with Italy as well. And Iceland, that's just a given, right? I mean, Iceland's geothermal offerings, it's built into the DNA of that country.
Yeah. So, isn't it? Yeah.
Really. And we have that all in our report.
Yes, absolutely, which I'm going to flash up in a minute. So, Thomas, anything you would like to end on before I give the links to both the reports? In terms of Saudi came up in our who's second, who's third, in a
Well, I
maybe it's
think
a personal opinion or that
yeah,
based
I
on
don't
stats.
know whether I could rank them. I'd probably get in trouble for that some way or another. But I would obviously the investment is in Saudi and in the UAE. But I would give a kind of special shout out to Oman and to Jordan. And I think what they offer, which you certainly don't get in the UAE, is Kathy talked about culture and how do these different nations within the Gulf really get across their culture to international visitors. And I think this is critical because it's not that well understood. Um, and Jordan and Oman do this very well because they have local populations working in hospitality in a way that you don't in the UAE because 10% of the UAE population is Emirati, and you won't meet an Emirati when you go into a spa or a hotel. That's not where they will be working. But you do get that in Jordan and Oman, and then you get a real sense for kind of their culture and the country. And that's another area where Saudi Arabia has a bit of an opportunity. So Red Sea Global, I know, are they have an academy and they're getting a lot of local people into hospitality. And I think that will really change, international perception of, go to Saudi Arabia and meet some of the kind of young Saudis working in some of these hotels, and it'll probably change a lot of perceptions in that sense. So I think yes, absolutely, in terms of culture and getting that across, that is critical. And yeah, Jordan and Oman are countries that do that brilliantly.
Amazing. So I think, Leela, if you might want to flash the QR codes up, I would like to thank Kathy and Thomas for a fantastic hour. And maybe we end on saying, actually, maybe we should be promoting two centre holidays because they're not that far from each other, relatively speaking, Asia and the Middle East. Maybe that's the way to end. So this is our future wellness tourism link. But you can also download it from our website. And then I think we have another QR code, which is if you want to go in and purchase the Global Wellness Summit report, as I say, that was launched a couple of weeks ago. There's so much information out there. It's been exciting to delve deep into Asia and the Middle East, and let's look forward to what the year ahead brings for both these regions and for all of us in the industry that are trying to get our fair share of this fantastically growing demographic profile. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
That was fun.
Good day. Bye.
Bye now.